911, what's your emergency? Yes, hello? There's a suspicious man standing outside our gated community. He's just leaning on a black SUV like he owns the place. I think he might be casing houses. He's not one of us. Ma'am, can you describe him? Karen's voice lowered with what she thought was justified paranoia. Tall, black, sunglasses, military-looking. Definitely not from around here. Probably up to no good. Unbeknownst to her, the man she just reported was Director Ray Matthews, the current head of Homeland Security, on a classified operation targeting a domestic terror cell that just so happened to be hiding behind the very gates Karen was so eager to protect. The clock was ticking, federal eyes were watching, and now a woman armed with a garden visor, a clipboard, and racial bias had just derailed a national security mission with one phone call. It all started like any other Tuesday in Hawthorne Lakes, a planned community where the grass was trimmed to code, dogs weren't allowed to bark past 8 p.m., and people like Karen felt they'd personally built the American dream with their bare hands. Karen, mid-50s, blonde bob, patriotic wind chimes on her porch year-round, was the unofficial sheriff of the cul-de-sac. She had no legal authority, but that never stopped her from using her laminated HOA badge like it was a federal ID. On this particular day, she was making her rounds with her clipboard, taking notes on grass height violations, and passive-aggressively snapping pictures of parked cars that dared to rest an inch over the painted curb lines. As she made her way past the community gates, she caught sight of a man leaning against a sleek black SUV, dressed in business casual attire but exuding something much more intense. He wasn't scrolling on his phone or fiddling with GPS. He was just watching. Calm. Steady. Almost too calm for Karen's liking. She paused, narrowed her eyes, and did what she did best. Assumed the worst. From her perspective, she was protecting her neighborhood from potential burglars, loiterers, or worse. From the man's perspective, he was minutes away from intercepting a package drop that could connect a local resident to a dangerous anti-government militia operating in 3 states. Ray Matthews wasn't a man to be trifled with. His mere presence in the field was a rarity. Usually he operated from secure offices, delegating missions across agencies. But today was different. Today, a credible lead had landed right in this sleepy suburb, and Ray had personally decided to oversee the drop point to make sure nothing went sideways. He'd chosen this location because it was discreet, quiet, and impossible to screw up. Enter Karen. After her 911 call, she didn't just go home and wait. No, she planted herself nearby behind a hedge, phone in hand, pretending to water a flower bed that wasn't hers. She wanted to see this criminal get hauled away. She even practiced her soundbites for the HOA Facebook page. Saw something, said something? Not on my watch. What she didn't notice was the tiny black drone buzzing above her, recording everything. Ray's team had eyes on her, confused about why this suburban woman was clearly surveilling their surveillance. When the police rolled in, 2 cruisers, lights flashing, sirens on low pulse, Karen nearly wet herself with excitement. Finally, proof that her instincts were valid. She stepped into the open, waving them down, pointing animatedly toward Ray. Officers approached cautiously, hands near weapons, shouting commands. Ray's team immediately intercepted the radio chatter, and within seconds, Ray raised his hands slowly, then reached into his inner jacket pocket with practiced calm. Director Ray Matthews, Department of Homeland Security. Badge and ID incoming. Don't shoot. The tension in the air snapped like a broken rubber band. One officer immediately recognized the name, face turning pale. The other, younger and clearly new, looked like he wanted to disappear. The moment was surreal. Karen standing there wide-eyed as her entire reality melted around her. Ray didn't yell. He didn't berate. He just gave Karen a single look, a mixture of disbelief, exhaustion, and a sliver of amusement, as if she were a fly that had just landed on the nose of a tiger mid-hunt. The police apologized, backed off, and one of them even mouthed sorry toward Ray's vehicle. Ray didn't speak to Karen. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. Karen was stunned, but only briefly. Like many who'd never been truly challenged, she recalibrated quickly, not with humility, but with denial. "How was I supposed to know?" she snapped to the nearest officer. He looked suspicious. "I was trying to help." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he got back in his car, and the second cruiser followed. The moment they left, Karen found herself alone again, no longer the neighborhood hero but now the unwitting fool at the center of something far beyond her clipboard. Ray resumed his position by the SUV, now joined by two more agents casually dressed but clearly military in gait and posture. Karen, however, wasn't done. Oh no. She stomped back toward her home, muttering to herself about government overreach and fake badges, and how something still didn't feel right. Her fingers were already flying across her phone screen as she typed up a fiery HOA forum post. "Neighborhood alert, deep state agent spotted near gate, stay vigilant." She added emojis, links to conspiracy sites, and even a grainy zoomed-in photo of Ray's SUV. The post went live within minutes. What she didn't know was that her post triggered a red flag, not for her followers, but for Homeland Security's Cyberwatch division. They'd been monitoring internet chatter connected to this op, and suddenly, Karen's IP address was sending out digital flares like a fireworks show at midnight. Her home, her phone, her smart fridge, it all became part of a digital surveillance web she couldn't begin to comprehend. Back at the curb, Ray received a quiet ping in his earpiece. "Director, local interference has escalated. Civilian flagged post. Possible operational compromise." Ray sighed deeply, resisting the urge to rub his temple. "Keep surveillance on the house," he said. "Let's see how far she takes this." Karen had poked a bear she didn't know existed. And that bear had a badge, a team, and a very long memory. Ray sat in his vehicle, the tinted glass shielding him from the blazing suburban sun and the rapidly spiraling situation that now included a woman live-posting conspiracy theories from her kitchen. What should have been a clean, under-the-radar surveillance op had now become a circus, thanks to one nosy neighbor with a superiority complex and too much time on her hands. His earpiece buzzed with updates from his team, who were watching Karen's digital footprint explode across several community forums and even spill into fringe message board. The phrase, "shadow agent spotted in suburbia," was trending in one thread, with commenters suggesting Ray might be a Chinese spy, a time traveler, or a government clone. Ray exhaled sharply, the corner of his mouth twitching with disbelief. Of all the threats to national security, he hadn't expected a HOA board member with a Facebook addiction to be the biggest risk factor today. Inside her kitchen, Karen was on fire. Figuratively. She downed 2 iced coffees and had her laptop, phone, and tablet all open as she toggled between her HOA Facebook group, Nextdoor, and something called truthpatriot.info. She even started a new thread titled "Suspicious Deep State Activity in Hawthorne Lakes," and uploaded her blurry photos of Ray standing near his SUV. In her mind, she was not the villain. She was the protagonist in her own political thriller, an everyday woman uncovering a vast conspiracy while the sheep around her slept. Her comments were a barrage of half-truths and full paranoia. "This is what happens when we let the government run wild," and "just asking questions, folks." Within an hour, the post had been shared over 200 times. Some people laughed. Others panicked. One neighbor asked if it was safe to walk her golden retriever. Another wondered if the man in the black SUV was connected to those strange helicopter noises last weekend. What Karen didn't realize was that every click, every upload, every message she sent was being tracked in real time. Ray's cyber division had flagged her as a live interference variable, nothing dangerous per se, but potentially capable of compromising a sensitive federal operation if she kept riling up the neighborhood. Ray made the call to have one of his undercover agents embedded in the area start trailing Karen's online behavior and physical movement. The agent, a woman named Sierra, was inserted as a new resident who, just moved in from Denver. Her cover was yoga instructor, dog lover, and low-key Instagram wellness coach. In reality, Sierra had served 3 tours, could disassemble a rifle blindfolded, and once infiltrated a cyber-terror cell posing as a lifestyle blogger. Within an hour of her arrival, she was in Karen's living room sipping chamomile tea, listening to a frenzied rant about Ray's SUV, illegal surveillance, and something about Area 51 being a distraction from what's really happening in HOA-run neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Ray continued the operation as best he could. The terror suspect, a man named Dwight Keller, had been under watch for months. The lead came from an intercepted forum post discussing potential homemade explosives and testing grounds. Keller had moved into Hawthorne Lakes just 4 months prior and already had 2 packages intercepted with odd components, none illegal but all suspicious when grouped together. Keller also happened to live 3 houses down from Karen, though she had never noticed him. She was too busy policing mailbox paint colors and chasing down teenagers on scooters. Ironically, if she'd focused her energy on actual threats instead of imaginary ones, she might have actually been useful. The operation was supposed to culminate in a drop-off, a courier bringing Keller a package allegedly containing a triggering device disguised as a drone controller. Ray's team had tracked the source, monitored the transit, and ensured a field op would be in place to intercept the handoff. But now everything was getting shaky. Karen's posts had drawn attention not just from suburban moms but from anti-government groups who were now commenting, sharing, and feeding into her delusions. One post even offered to come back her up if things got serious. That was all Ray needed. He immediately moved to accelerate the timetable. The drop was pushed up by 48 hours. The team would make the play tonight. Back in her home, Karen was pacing in slippers, phone to her ear, calling her emergency HOA council, which consisted of 3 other retirees, one of whom thought the moon landing was fake. "I'm telling you," she whispered as if someone could hear her through the toaster, "they're watching us. That man out there? He's not neighborhood security. He's probably CIA. I want a full board meeting tonight. We need to take control of this community." The others reluctantly agreed, mostly because Karen was relentless, and partly because they were curious. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind perfectly pruned hedges, a black van rolled slowly into the neighborhood. Keller stood outside, pretending to check his mailbox. Ray's team watched from 3 points, one perched in a landscaping van, another inside a home for sale, and Ray from inside his SUV down the block. Sierra was embedded with Karen, who had insisted she attend the emergency HOA meeting, taking place on the clubhouse lawn. Folding chairs were set up. Snacks were brought. Karen had even prepared a slideshow titled, "Securing Our Suburbia, When the Government Gets Too Close." As the handoff began, just a simple package exchange followed by a nod, Karen glanced toward the street and shouted, "That's him again! The one I told you about! Look!" The HOA board turned. A few others stopped mid-chip dip. Cameras came out. Lights flicked on. Ray, watching it unfold, clenched his jaw. The suspect, noticing the attention, tensed and made a sudden move, grabbing the package and sprinting toward the back gate. Ray's agents moved instantly. The night turned chaotic. People screamed. Karen screamed louder. Sierra grabbed Karen and pulled her out of the way as 2 agents darted past, chasing Keller through manicured hedges and backyard pools. The package fell during the chase. One agent secured it while another tackled Keller just outside the community gate. It was over in seconds. No shots fired. No explosions. Just stunned silence from a half-dozen HOA board members who had no idea they'd just witnessed a federal takedown during their meeting about mailbox height regulations. Karen stood speechless, for the first time in years, eyes darting between Sierra and the agents now leading Keller into an unmarked vehicle. Sierra leaned in and whispered, "You just tried to stop a federal operation." Karen blinked. I thought." Ray stepped into view. Calm. Professional. Controlled. "You thought wrong," he said, before walking off to brief his team. Karen didn't respond. She simply sat down in her folding chair, still holding her clipboard like a useless shield, while the weight of what had just happened slowly sank in. The aftermath should have been a moment of quiet reflection for Karen, but reflection wasn't in her vocabulary. Less than 12 hours after nearly compromising a Homeland Security sting operation, she was already rewriting the narrative in her head. In her version of the story, she had spotted something no one else had, bravely sounded the alarm, and possibly prevented a terrorist attack. That the man she had zip-tied in her fantasy was the actual head of Homeland Security seemed, to her, like a mere plot twist, one she would smooth over with enough hashtags and justifications. The HOA group chat was now flooded with her voice note. "I told you something was off. This only proves I have an eye for danger." "You're welcome." The others weren't so convinced. Most had seen the chaos unfold in real time. Keller being tackled. The agents swarming in. Ray flashing credentials and walking through the commotion like a man who'd done this before, many times over. Still, a few in the neighborhood had become swept up by Karen's impromptu patriotism, and she knew it. That morning, emboldened by a few likes and passive encouragement, she printed flyers. Actual, glossy flyers. They read, "Take back our neighborhood. Join the watchdogs. Stop government overreach," with a picture of her pointing dramatically toward the gates. She handed them out at the local dog park, the community pool, even outside the yoga studio. Sierra, still under cover, received one and nearly choked on her water. Ray, reviewing the footage from a drone posted above the community, had to pause the feed to process what he was seeing. Karen was assembling a group. Not a militia, thank goodness, but something potentially more chaotic. An untrained, uninformed HOA militialite powered by rumors and caffeine. The real concern, however, wasn't Karen's flyers or her impromptu speeches on Nextdoor. It was the timing. The operation had taken down Keller, but Ray's intel indicated there were more involved, possibly another courier still operating locally. And now, thanks to Karen's antics, the element of surprise was gone. The entire neighborhood was buzzing with theories. Some thought it was a reality TV shoot. Others said it was a movie set. Karen herself floated the idea that it was all a test to see who would comply with the deep state. She was, of course, proud of her noncompliance. When word spread that the HOA would be holding its annual 4th of July mixer that weekend, Karen saw it as a golden opportunity. She proposed the theme herself, freedom from fear. No one quite knew what that meant, but she promised decorations, music, and a patriotic speech that would make George Washington cry tears of liberty. Ray, however, saw the event as a potential disaster. A large gathering meant increased chatter, distracted residents, and a perfect chance for any remaining suspects to slip in or out unnoticed. Karen was oblivious to all of this. She was in full event planning mode, wearing red, white, and blue everything, hat, earrings, even socks. She ordered sparklers, coordinated a Freedom Pie bake-off, and insisted on starting the evening with her personal rendition of the national anthem, complete with a kazoo solo. By the time the day arrived, the community center lawn was transformed into a kitschy parade of lawn chairs, bunting, and inflatable eagles. Music blared from Bluetooth speakers. Kids ran around with face paint. Burgers sizzled on propane grills. And standing quietly off to the side, eyes scanning the crowd behind mirrored sunglasses, was Ray Matthews. He wasn't there for the pie. Word had come down that the suspected second courier might be attending the event. Surveillance had picked up a signal from a burner phone near the area 2 nights earlier. Ray's team, now in casual summer attire but packing real firepower, moved through the crowd pretending to be residents, grill dads, and overly committed cornhole competitors. Sierra, still shadowing Karen, was stationed near the sound booth, keeping an ear on every word and an eye on the stage. At exactly 6 p.m., Karen took the microphone. The crowd wasn't exactly captive. Half were distracted by hot dogs, but she spoke as if delivering a State of the Union. She launched into her speech with dramatic pauses, references to the brave men and women who fought for HOA rule enforcement, and thinly veiled digs at Ray, whom she referred to only as Mr. Black SUV. The audience cringed, laughed politely, or looked down at their phones. Karen was undeterred. Then, right in the middle of her second kazoo solo, an ear-splitting rendition of Yankee Doodle, a figure moved quickly through the crowd toward the gate near the clubhouse. Ray, watching closely, caught it instantly. A man in sunglasses with a bulging backpack slipped behind the grilling station and made a beeline for the exit. Ray didn't hesitate. He tossed his lemonade, gave a silent signal to 2 agents, and followed. Karen, seeing Ray move, abandoned the microphone and ran after him, yelling, "Hey! What do you think you're doing? This is a private event." She caught up just as Ray tackled the suspect, the 2 of them slamming into the grass beside the bounce house. Children screamed. Parents froze. Someone dropped a tray of ribs. Karen, in her overconfidence, grabbed a pair of plastic zip ties from her purse. Yes, she carried them, just in case, and actually attempted to restrain Ray. It happened so fast no one could process it. One moment, Ray had a suspect in custody. The next, Karen was looping a zip tie around his arm, shouting, "Citizen's arrest! You've gone rogue!" Ray looked at her, expressionless, then turned to the agents now converging. "She's with the HOA," he said dryly. "Someone please escort her before she chokes herself with her own nonsense." 2 agents gently pulled Karen back as Ray completed the arrest. The backpack, upon inspection, contained modified drone components, radio wiring, and a data drive full of names, potential targets, donors, and collaborators tied to the same extremist group. It was a massive break, and Ray had secured it in broad daylight, during a kazoo concert, surrounded by clueless civilians eating corn on the cob. The chaos slowly dissipated. The suspect was taken away. The children went back to their bounce house. The music resumed. Karen, however, wasn't done. She ran to the stage and grabbed the mic again. "You saw that, right? I stopped him. I knew something was wrong." She was promptly cut off when Sierra yanked the mic cord. Back in his SUV, Ray reviewed the footage and shook his head. "She zip-tied me," he said, more to himself than anyone. "She actually zip-tied me during a takedown." The agent beside him chuckled. "What do we do about her?" Ray paused, then smiled faintly. "Nothing. Let her keep talking. At this rate, she's more useful as a distraction than a threat. Just make sure she doesn't try to start a podcast." It wasn't over yet. But after what had just happened, one thing was clear. Karen had officially crossed from neighborhood nuisance to national spectacle. And the world was starting to notice. The video hit the internet before the last firework exploded. Within hours, it had gone viral. The clip began with Karen on stage, mid-kazoo solo, and ended with her zip-tying the head of Homeland Security during an active arrest. Someone had captured the entire ordeal on their phone, shaky and breathless with laughter, and uploaded it with the caption, "Karen arrests federal agent at HOA barbecue." The internet did what it always did. Memes exploded. Talk shows picked it up. Reaction videos flooded TikTok. Late-night hosts had a field day. Even a political cartoon surfaced, showing Karen with a megaphone and a badge that said, "HOA Supreme Leader, zip-tying Uncle Sam." Karen, oblivious to how she was being portrayed, mistook the attention for support. She was finally being recognized. In her mind, this was her moment. She printed out screenshots of headlines and pinned them to her corkboard next to American flags and laminated HOA bylaws. Finally, she told herself, people are waking up. She filmed a Facebook Live from her porch, standing proudly in front of her fake flower garden. To all my new followers, thank you. I may not have fancy badges or a big black SUV, but I have something more important: common sense. I won't let anyone turn our peaceful neighborhood into a surveillance state. Ray watched the livestream from a secure command center that had been temporarily set up in the back room of a local bakery. His team stood behind him, half amused, half concerned. The viral fame was a problem. Not because it endangered Ray personally. He'd had his face on press briefings before, but because it brought unwanted scrutiny to an operation that wasn't supposed to exist on paper. More concerning, however, was the growing number of online fringe groups sharing Karen's video and claiming she had exposed a secret deep state takedown. One post even suggested Ray wasn't really a federal agent, but a globalist plant sent to distract from the truth. At Homeland Security headquarters, phones were ringing non-stop. A senator's aide had called, asking why a woman with no security clearance had managed to physically interfere in a federal operation and then go on to gather 500,000 followers on social media overnight. The question wasn't unreasonable. Ray was summoned for a hearing. Cameras flashed as he walked through the Capitol building, stone-faced, flanked by aides. When asked by a reporter if the incident at the HOA event compromised national security, Ray only said, "It compromised something, all right." Meanwhile, Karen's home was under discreet federal surveillance. Her social media posts, emails, and even her browser history were being monitored, not because she was considered dangerous, but because her sudden fame had made her a magnet for people who were. One particularly active commenter had a history of building improvised devices. Another had attended 2 armed protests. Karen, of course, had no idea. She was still too busy replying to every comment with a waving flag emoji and telling people to stay alert. Then came the knock at her door. Karen opened it to find 2 federal agents in suit. She blinked but smiled. "Are you here to interview me? About the video? I'm happy to speak on record." The taller agent calmly held up a warrant. "We're here to seize electronic devices used to distribute classified misinformation and to investigate unauthorized access to federal surveillance infrastructure." Karen's smile faltered. "Excuse me." The agent didn't respond. He stepped past her and began looking around. Another pair of agents entered and went directly to her son's room, where they found the laptop Karen had been using to dig into what she claimed was suspicious activity on government websites. What Karen thought was harmless digging was, in fact, an attempted breach. She had clicked a phishing link, given access to her IP, and accidentally downloaded a confidential metadata packet related to Ray's operation. She didn't even know she had done it, but the logs were there, plain as day. Karen shouted in protest as her tablet, phone, and desktop computer were boxed and taken. "I have rights," she yelled. "You can't do this. I'm an HOA officer." The lead agent gave her a patient look. "Ma'am, you are not above federal law." It was a line she would hear several more times that week. News of the raid spread fast. A few of her followers turned on her, calling her deep state bait. Others doubled down, claiming the raid proved she was a threat to the system. Karen, no longer in control of the narrative, tried to livestream again, but her new phone kept glitching, likely because her internet activity was being filtered. She called the HOA board for an emergency meeting. Only one member showed up, and even he left early, mumbling something about lawyers and being done with all this. Then came the lawsuit. Residents of Hawthorne Lakes filed a class action suit against Karen for endangering the neighborhood, violating privacy laws, and dragging their community into a federal investigation. Some were furious their children had been present during the takedown. Others were upset that their property values had dropped by 3% since the video went viral. Karen tried to rally her watchdogs, but by then, most had gone quiet or blocked her. HOA leadership voted unanimously to ban her from attending meetings, holding office, or making decisions about community guidelines. Even her house, once pristine with color-coded decorations, began to show signs of neglect. Trash bags lingered on her porch. A passive-aggressive flock of pink flamingos appeared overnight, with small cardboard signs that read Karen's Ark of Delusion and No Kazoos Allowed. The local paper ran a headline, "From Clipboard to Courtroom, the Rise and Fall of a Suburban Vigilante." Ray, meanwhile, sat before a congressional panel, calmly answering questions about the incident. A senator raised an eyebrow. You were zip-tied by a woman from a homeowners association? Ray nodded. Yes, Senator. And I still have the marks. The room laughed. Ray smiled politely but shifted quickly to the seriousness of the operation. He presented the evidence seized from the second courier's backpack, the names on the list, the threats averted. When asked if the operation was ultimately a success, Ray responded, it was. But it came dangerously close to failure, not from hostile forces abroad, but from a misinformed civilian who confused patriotism with performance. After the hearing, Ray walked through the quiet halls of the building, his team trailing behind. One of his agents asked what they should do about Karen now. Nothing, Ray said. She's already done it to herself. He glanced at his phone and saw yet another headline. This one read, HOA hero or national hazard? America reacts. He shook his head and slipped the phone back in his pocket. Back in Hawthorne Lakes, Karen stared out her window, watching a group of kids chalking peace signs on the sidewalk. Her phone buzzed with another email labeled, Final Notice, Legal Action Pending. Her voice was hoarse from yelling at no one. For the first time, she didn't post a response. She just stood there, quiet, the weight of it all pressing in. She had become a national symbol, but not the kind she wanted. And now, the reality was setting in. No amount of flags or slogans could zip-tie her way out of what she'd started. The courtroom was colder than Karen expected. Not in temperature, but in energy. There were no patriotic flags draped across the gallery, no cheering crowds waving homemade signs with her name. Just silence, punctuated by the occasional shuffle of papers or a judge's gavel striking wood. She sat at the defendant's table in a navy blue blazer that still had the tag tucked inside the collar. Her lawyer, a public defender who had drawn the short straw, leaned over and whispered that under no circumstances was she to interrupt the proceedings. Karen nodded but barely heard him. She was too busy scanning the faces in the room, trying to find one sympathetic set of eyes. She found none. Across from her sat Ray Matthews, poised and calm as always. He wasn't wearing his tactical gear or sunglasses this time, just a crisp suit and a neutral expression. If he felt anything about having to testify against a suburban woman who had zip-tied him mid-operation, he didn't show it. His statement was clinical. He described the operation, the risks, the near compromise, and the importance of discretion. When the judge asked him to elaborate on the moment Karen intervened, he simply said, she mistook her role as a civilian for authority she didn't have. Her actions nearly endangered lives, including her own. Karen tried not to flinch. She thought she'd be able to explain everything, to clear it all up. That when people heard her side, they'd understand she wasn't trying to cause trouble, she was trying to protect her neighborhood. But as her lawyer stood and offered her defense, she realized the story she'd built in her head didn't carry much weight in a room full of facts. The prosecution played the video. There she was, kazoo in mouth, marching like a Revolutionary War reenactor, while Ray's agents swarmed through the background. Then came the zip ties, the struggle, her triumphant shout, "You're under citizen's arrest." The jury didn't laugh, but the smirks were visible. When it was her turn to speak, her lawyer warned her again to be careful. She took the stand with shaky hands, looked at the judge, then the jury, then down at her note. She hadn't rehearsed this as much as she should have. "I just wanted to help," she said. "I saw something suspicious. I didn't know who he was. He didn't look like security. No one told us what was going on. I didn't mean any harm." The prosecutor stood, expression unreadable. "Are you aware, Ms. Hargrove, that you interfered in a classified federal operation, exposed agents on active duty, physically restrained the Director of Homeland Security, and then shared disinformation about him with over 500,000 people online?" Karen hesitated. I didn't know he was the director. He never introduced himself." "That's because he was working undercover, as part of an operation you disrupted." Karen's voice got smaller. Well, maybe if someone had told us something, this wouldn't have happened. The prosecutor's next question landed like a slap. Do you think classified federal missions should include press releases for the benefit of HOA officers? There was a pause. Karen tried to muster her indignation, but it had deflated. The weight of the trial, the cameras, the people she once thought supported her now avoiding her gaze, all of it bore down on her shoulders. Her lawyer gently touched her elbow, signaling that her time was up. She stepped down without another word. The verdict didn't surprise anyone. Guilty of obstruction, interference in a federal investigation, and distribution of false information intended to compromise national security. She wasn't going to prison, but the judge made sure her sentence hurt. 6 months of community service, 2 years of probation, mandatory internet restrictions, a personal apology to Director Matthews, and worst of all, a permanent ban from serving on any homeowners association board, anywhere in the country. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Karen kept her head down, but it didn't matter. The public had moved on from fascination to fatigue. She wasn't trending anymore. Her name was now shorthand for suburban overreach. For weeks afterward, every time someone got caught overstepping their bounds in a neighborhood dispute, the comments section would light up. Nice going, Karen. The HOA president of Hawthorne Lakes even issued a public statement to distance the community from her actions. Her mailbox was plastered with legal notices and HOA complaints, some legitimate, some just neighbors getting petty revenge. Ray didn't speak to her until the end. He found her outside the courthouse, sitting on a bench in silence, her clipboard lying next to her like a discarded weapon. He sat down beside her. She didn't look at him. I didn't mean to ruin anything, she said finally, staring at the sidewalk. I thought I was helping. I know, Ray said. That's the problem. They sat there a moment longer. She expected a lecture or a warning, maybe even a threat. But instead, he stood and walked away, leaving her with nothing but the sound of her own breath and the dull hum of city traffic. 2 weeks later, Ray returned to Hawthorne Lakes, not for an operation but for a neighborhood town hall. A quiet thank-you event for those who had assisted his team discreetly, the actual HOA president among them. The community gathered in folding chairs on the clubhouse lawn again, but this time there were no kazoos, no flags, no over-the-top speeches. Ray handed out a few commendations. He gave a short, respectful address about vigilance, trust, and the importance of letting professionals do their jobs. Before he left, he walked by the front gate and noticed a new sign hanging just below the neighborhood's welcome plaque. It read, "No unauthorized surveillance. No unauthorized zip ties." Someone had drawn a little cartoon of Karen beside it, holding a clipboard like a sword. Ray chuckled quietly. It wasn't exactly federal protocol, but it got the point across. Karen watched the meeting from her front porch, uninvited, unacknowledged. Her phone sat beside her, powered off. She hadn't posted in days. For once, she had nothing to say. As the crowd dispersed, one of the neighborhood kids waved at her. She raised her hand, but the smile didn't quite make it to her eyes. The wind blew gently through her wind chimes, now silent, no longer clanging with purpose. She sat alone, surrounded by a porch full of fading decorations, and wondered how it had all spiraled so far out of control. In the end, Karen didn't lose everything. She kept her home. She kept her garden. But she lost something she hadn't realized she valued until it was gone, her illusion of control. Her clipboard now sat in the hall closet, dust gathering around its edges. Her flyers were gone. Her soapbox had collapsed under the weight of consequence. Ray never returned to Hawthorne Lakes after that. He had other operations, other threats to handle. But for the residents of that pristine little community, his presence was unforgettable. He had reminded them of the line between awareness and hysteria, between concern and chaos. And he had reminded Karen, perhaps most painfully of all, that patriotism wasn't about who yelled the loudest. It was about knowing when to sit down, stay quiet, and let the real work happen,